You're listening to The Step Back, a Mavs podcast.
You hot right now, step back. I like this, TK. I like this, TK. I like that.
Yeah, it's the Mavericks, all about action. Don't do no acting, no Samuel Jackson. Dirk get the ball, you know that it's magic. Post move deadly, yeah, it get tragic. Look with the ball, yeah, it get nasty. He'll drop 30, don't gotta ask him. Got Kristaps, coach at the Adam, I spaz like Dallas. I thought I'm rapping, God. If Luka shoot the ball, you know that it's cash. But my boy still living the past. Now you got my boy Kristaps, looking like Duncan Nash in the gap. They just want a ring, wanna fill the gap. On your team head, I ain't talking hats. Dang, go relax, till they the champs. Defense still coming with the Calabash flow. The man's the best on the flow. I'm wild, but yeah, I'm the GOAT. This game get cold. Yeah, you might need a coach, your friends turn into your foe. But I'ma just roll, gotta keep rolling your boat. Yeah, I swear I give them hope. I say I'm cleaner than the soap. This time of year proves who will really sink afloat. For yeah, real. It's the Mavericks, all about action. Don't do no acting, no Samuel Jackson. Dirk at the ball.
Welcome in, everybody, to another edition of the Step Back, a Mavs podcast. I'm Dalton Trigg, and I'm here with my co-host and DallasBasketball.com colleague, Matt Galatzan. I know y'all just heard that new custom intro we got our guy Andrew Bishop to make for us, a.k.a. Drew Pock. Matt, that was fire, as always. The guy, he never disappoints us. He jumped on that as soon as we got the news that Dennis Smith Jr. was traded to the Knicks for Kristaps Porzingis. What do you think?
Man, that thing just melted my face off. How good is he, man? That's crazy. Like, he sent us the beat a couple hours before he did the track for it or whatever, and man, it was so good. I was shocked. Like, that's 2 in a row that he's just absolutely killed and spit out Godzilla flames, and I'm so happy about it.
Drew Pock is 2 for 2 on Step Back podcast flamethrowers, and I hope our listeners appreciate this guy. I mean, we consider him part of the crew now. I mean, he's hopefully going to be doing this for us for a long time, unless he gets too big and leaves us in the dust, which we would understand if that happens. But we
Don't
consider
forget
him
me, Drew Pock.
We consider him part of the team, and I mean, he just does a great job. So we're going to just jump right into it, Matt. The Mavs got a 99-93 win over the Charlotte Hornets at home. Luka had a triple-double despite only shooting 5 of 20 from the field. But the biggest news that just shocked everybody and caused me to not even hardly pay attention in the second half was the news drop that Harrison Barnes got traded mid-game. That was crazy. I couldn't believe it. What were you thinking when that happened?
I mean, I didn't expect it, obviously. I mean, this is the second time in a week that they've made a massive trade, and we haven't been able to pay attention to a game. But in the middle of a game, I don't think I've ever seen that before. I mean, at least in Dallas. I don't know about you, but that's just kind of bizarre, don't you think? I mean, were they in talks before the game? Were they in talks, like, did they start the conversation during the game? Like, I don't understand like how that came to be, but
well, that was definitely a first for me. I've never seen anybody get traded during a game, not in real time, especially for the Mavs. But no, I think these talks have, it's like I sent out a tweet earlier, but Fish was telling us last week that a couple of teams were planning to call the Mavs today, Wednesday, before the trade deadline about Harrison Barnes. And then, the news came out that the Kings were one of those teams. Sure enough, they called today. And so these talks were ongoing throughout the day. And I'm sure that, they had spoke on it on some level before this game started. But, I mean, I don't think it's something they came together during the game and everything got done at one time. They just agreed to it. I'm sure the Mavs meant for the news, or they hoped that the news didn't leak so they could just announce it after the game. But, man, it's hard to keep that stuff from Shams and Woj.
Well, sure, but, I mean, had they agreed to it before the game or whatever, had that been the case, then Barnes would not have been playing in the game. So they had to have at least finalized it during the game.
Oh,
I saw
yeah.
a tweet somewhere. I think it was Chris Henderson that tweeted it, that he said that he saw a video of Donnie on his phone during the game. I mean, I don't know if we're ever going to see that video or what, but it's interesting to think about. Like, as soon as they finalized the deal in principle, they just yanked him off the floor, I'm sure. But that's just crazy still.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think the deal was made, in game, but just the talks of it, I don't think they started talking about it, while the game. I think there were talks of it beforehand. Maybe the Mavs got a sense that something wouldn't really materialize, so they didn't, they didn't bench Barnes or anything like that. But when it happened, they benched him, and knowing how tight-lipped the Mavs are about stuff like this, you have to think it was somebody on Sacramento's side that leaked it, and it just, I don't know, it made a little bit of a mess for them. But this is big for Dallas. This going into the summer, it's huge. Fish tweeted out a while ago that this opens up a little over $30 million in cap space this summer now. And they might not be done making moves. We still got till tomorrow at 2:00, I believe.
Yeah, it's 2:00 Central Time. 3:00. Anyway, it's 2:00 Central Time, I believe.
Yeah, so we still have some moves a move that could be made. My thinking, in regards to Dwight Powell, maybe, and trying to either add another player that they want going forward, or even if it's just like a salary dump type of deal. But you mentioned.
Sorry, I was just going to say maybe it's a player that they think they might want, that they're going to test out and still in expiring, and if it doesn't work out, then they go a separate way, take a risk.
Well, that was going to lead me to my next point, because we were just kind of talking before we got set up here, and you ran a very, very interesting idea across. You put it on the table. I want you to put that out there for our listeners.
So, okay, going into the summer, the Mavericks, like we said, now have $30 million in cap space. But they could still potentially move off of another $9.6 million in Dwight Powell, who has the opportunity to opt in for his for the last year of his contract is with a player option. So my idea that I dropped to you was Dwight Powell and the expiring contract of JJ Barea, just to help make the money match, or you could even use his disabled player exception for, I think it's $1.8 million. The money might still work there. Unfortunately, on Trade NBA, I can't use that, so I'm not sure if it works or not. But you trade that to the Pelicans for Nikola Mirotic, who is on a $12.5 million expiring deal. He's a stretch shooting big, power forward, can do a lot of different things that the Mavericks really need. And if it doesn't work, you can just move him off the books this summer and say, hey, see you later. Or if you like what you see and it works well and it becomes a good marriage, you still have the money to sign your big go after Klay Thompson or, Middleton or whatever you want to do, and then bring him in as, another piece of your team to help challenge immediately for the West with a 20-year-old and a 22-year-old or 23-year-old leading your team.
Well, here's the thing. I absolutely love that idea, because, you could bring him in and you could either start him at the 4, and he gives you kind of like a Dirk type of mold. I mean, he's a traditional stretch 4. You could bring him off the bench. He'd be a better 3-point shooting version of Dwight Powell, pretty much. I mean, he's not gonna finish a bunch of lobs, but he's a more efficient scorer. That the bench, could definitely use that for the Mavs. But I saw something earlier in the day about the Philadelphia 76ers being interested in Mirotic. And it got me wondering, if they decided to, I'm not exactly sure what they could send back to New Orleans, but say it was a package that included Markelle Fultz. I mean, you'd have to think that the Pelicans would prefer that over Dwight Powell and, whatever else fits that deal.
No, yeah, sure. I mean, this is strictly from a Mavs perspective. I mean, if you wanted to, you could. Well, I mean, let's think about it. The Pelicans are retooling. They're obviously going to move on from Anthony Davis. They're going to start tanking. They're going to want to get Zion Williamson. They're going to want to acquire as many assets as possible. So, maybe they don't want to just, take Dwight Powell or whatever, since they already have Julius Randle on the books. I'm just saying the money matches, and for a team that's trying to tank on a guy that's expiring anyway, they're not going to be good next year. Dwight Powell's an asset they could use going forward as expiring money. He's also a young player that still has a lot of upside, in my opinion. So, you never know what you could do. You could, if you wanted to, I wouldn't like to do this, but since they just got Trey Burke, maybe you could throw in Jalen Brunson instead, and that's a young asset, or you could throw in a second-round pick or something that, entices them a little bit more to get that done.
Well, after tonight, and I mean, obviously you don't want to put too much stock into something out of first impressions, but if they had to part with Trey Burke, my feelings wouldn't be super hurt over it. I mean, I like the guy. I think he could potentially be like a spark plug coming off the bench for this team, kind of like how J.J. Barea is. You wrote a piece on that exact scenario for DallasBasketball.com here recently, and but like I said, if you get a player like Mirotic and you have to part with a player you just got in a trade that's on his level, I think you have to do it.
Well, here's the problem with that, and it's kind of a thing that I recently discovered while messing around with these trade engines or whatever you want to call them. So Trey Burke, and the same goes for Courtney Lee and Tim Hardaway too, if for whatever reason you decided you wanted to move one of them. Since they just got traded to Dallas, they cannot be moved as part of in conjunction with other players from the same team. So, for example, if you wanted to do Dwight Powell and Trey Burke together for Mirotic, you can't do that.
I got you.
So, unfortunately, that's off the table. You could trade him by himself for something else, but as of now, that's just not something they can do.
Well, I'm still processing this. Every time something happens, and you want to give your immediate reactions, and there's still so many things just moving through my head right now. But with Harrison Barnes going to Sacramento, I know you have, and I have too. We've had our times this year where Harrison Barnes has really frustrated us with his style of play. But just him leaving now and how he left. What are your lasting thoughts of Harrison Barnes going to be?
He's a really class dude, perfect professional. I really, there's nothing about him personally that I ever disliked. I mean, he's always been super, super cordial with the media, always been really easy to talk to, conducted himself truly like a professional. On the court, he was more frustrating for me because of his kind of tunnel vision, black hole mentality that he kind of had that seemed to happen more this year, I feel like, than... I mean, I don't know about how you feel about it, but it seemed to me that it happened more this year than it did the last couple of years.
He was definitely pressing more this season than he had the last few seasons, in my opinion. When he came to Dallas, he was the guy. The Mavs were in a situation where they were really kind of desperate. They threw the money at him. Kevin Durant chose to go to Golden State, which allowed them to throw that money at Barnes to steal him away. He instantly became the guy, and then he took another step last year. Well, then this year with Luka coming in and clearly taking over as the Mavericks' best player, Barnes had to take a back seat. And I mean, the more Luka has grown throughout this season, it seems like the more Harrison Barnes, his role diminished. And I think it was more like almost like a desperation. It felt like he was playing with a lot of desperation. He was just really pushing and almost trying to hold on to, being that guy he was the previous 2 seasons. He just didn't. As much as we talked about Dennis when he was here, adjusting to a role, playing more off the ball and everything, and having trouble with that, I would argue that Barnes has had more trouble adjusting to his secondary role with the Mavericks this season.
Which is kind of bizarre considering he was in a third or fourth option role in Golden State. So what bothered me and what's probably going to bother Sacramento too is, and he kind of did this before this year. I guess I just noticed it more this year since, we were more vocal about pointing it out and looking for it. But once he touched the ball, it always seemed like, all right, now it's time for me to go score, because that's what he's been used to the last couple of years. And you're right. I think it was really hard for him to kind of shift and become more of a spot up, outside shooter with Luka in the primary role. And that's got to be a tough adjustment. And you kind of got a feel for the guy, because when he was brought in, he was kind of thought of, because he was 24 when they brought him in, 25,
yeah,
something like that. So they were kind of thinking of him as like the beginning of this new young core, and he probably had a really good feeling about that. And then as soon as all these things started changing, he kind of came into this season like, okay, I still got to prove myself that I'm the best guy on the team and that I'm the best option for this team moving forward, and I can be that number one guy. But he just wasn't. And it just started getting progressively worse and worse and worse.
Well, you mentioned that he was the third or fourth guy. He was really the fourth or fifth guy on that Warriors team. And so, he had been in that situation before. But when you get that money, when you secure the bag, so to speak, and you're in Dallas and you're the man for 2 seasons, and then all of a sudden this dude just comes out of nowhere. Well, he didn't come out of nowhere, but he comes in, he's living up to expectations and more than that, in his first season, and it really just pushed him further down the pecking order a lot sooner than what he probably thought it would. So, when you're the guy for that long, I don't care who you are, that's human nature. Obviously you're going to feel like you need to press a little bit, and it's just hard. He's a good dude, like you said. He's the classiest guy you'll ever meet. The Dallas community will miss him more than anything. He
was great for the community.
He's given so much back to the community. He's been just as much, if not more, to the community than as far as giving back as Dirk has over the years, in my opinion. Not near as long as Dirk, but that's how much effort he put into it. But branching off of that, I want to read this tweet that just came up. Bobby Marks, he tweeted out, "If Dallas constructs the Harrison Barnes trade by using the Wes Matthews exception, which was created in the Porzingis deal, Dallas would create a $21.3 million trade exception. The trade exception would be the largest in NBA history. The next biggest one was 17.8 created when Orlando sent Dwight Howard to the Lakers."
Wait, what?
Yeah.
$23.1 million trade exception?
21.3.
21.3?
But still, it would be
God.
The largest trade exception in NBA history.
What do you do with that?
I don't. You want Kevin Love?
Like seriously though, you could use JJ Barea's expiring contract and a $21.3 million trade exception, and go get like an Otto Porter level contract.
Yep.
I don't want that right now, but like
I don't either.
That's
By
nuts.
the way, shout out to the Chicago Bulls for pulling the trigger on that earlier, because the Kings, they were eyeing Otto Porter Jr. and Harrison Barnes, and then once Chicago pulled the trigger, sent Jabari Parker and Bobby Portis, sent those two players for Otto Porter Jr., you kind of figured that there was going to be a little bit more traction with Dallas and Sacramento. So shout out to the Bulls for getting this thing started. But yeah, that $21.3 million trade exception, I don't even know where to start with. I'm going to have to think about that a little bit more. But they have a year. They have a year to use it if it happens. And it says if. It says if Dallas constructs the Harrison Barnes trade by using the Wes Matthews exception, which, I mean, it would have to if it's just Zach Randolph and Justin Jackson coming back.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when it happened, because the difference in their money is, if you add the salaries from the guys from Sacramento, is around $12 million. So you'd have to use that exception because that's too big of a gap between their contracts. But unless those are just the pieces that we know are going right now, and maybe there's something else going later when it becomes official, I don't know. But dude, that's crazy. Donnie Nelson's got to win GM of the Year if that happens, right?
Donnie is absolutely on fire right now. He is putting in work. It started in June, and it hasn't stopped. I mean, he's on fire right now. There's really nothing else you can say about it. And he still might not be done. You know, like I said, he might come out tomorrow and trade Dwight Powell for something, or there's no telling with him right now, but he's definitely taking initiative. The Mavericks are going in a different direction, which is good. We all saw it. They needed to. The players they had in place just weren't working. You've got to build around Luka. You know, you've got to put players around him that'll enable him to perform to his full potential. And you got to, you know, it's like Tim Hardaway Jr. He only shot 5 of 16 in the game tonight against Charlotte. He had 12 points, 4 rebounds, and I think most of that was just nerves with him. He seemed very nervous starting out the game, but you could just tell, like, the energy he plays with. And, you know, his first points as a Maverick was a really nice lob from Luka for an alley-oop. It just seems like he's going to be a really good fit next to Luka, which is something you couldn't say the same for Wes Matthews. I mean, it's just a completely different dynamic, and I'm excited that Donnie Nelson in the front office has decided to completely uproot this thing and go in a different direction. I'm really excited for the future.
Well, do you remember how frustrated we were? I can't remember. I think it was whoever they played right before Detroit. Not New York, obviously, but like the last home game. I can't remember off the top of my head who that was. But it might have been Detroit. I mean, it might have been Toronto. Is that right? I think it was Toronto.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Anyway, we were just like, they trotted out the same starting lineup of Dennis and Wes and Harrison and Luka and DeAndre that had won 7 of 18, or they were 7 and 11 together, and they had the lowest net rating in the NBA or something like that, or close to it.
Right.
And we were just like, man, this is going to be the team. This is the team I'm going to have to watch for the next 32 games or 33 games or whatever it was. And it was so frustrating. And then literally a week later, they've traded 4 out of their 5 starters and have completely, like you said, uprooted the entire thing and gotten themselves a young future unicorn superstar in Kristaps Porzingis, $30 million in cap space to use this summer, potentially a $21.3 million trade exception. And 8 months ago, they got the Rookie of the Year in another huge trade that was pulled off by Donnie Nelson.
Well, and they got Jalen Brunson, too, in that draft.
Let's not forget Jalen Brunson either.
Dude, like he's going to turn out to be one of the biggest steals of the draft, considering where he was picked. You know, they pretty much everybody that's picked in that range, you know, their team wants they want to say that, oh, well, he should have been a first-round pick. He should have been. Well, Jalen Brunson, I mean, I don't think there's any BS to that. I think he really should have been
Breaking news.
What's going on?
Fish literally just tweeted at 11:26 p.m. as we're recording this that a source has told DallasBasketball.com that the Mavericks are juggling roster spots post-trade and plan to release backup center Salah Mejri. I don't know how Luka's going to feel about that, but
does this mean we're about to have a Ray Spalding reunion?
No, because they're already at 15 players on the roster before the trade. So, and that's the max you can have on the roster. So
come on, man. Let's release.
I think they need to make this trade go through. They need to release Mejri and then bring in Jackson and Zebo, and then potentially they could buy out Zebo and bring back Mejri, or they could bring back Ray Spalding. I think they would probably bring back Mejri just to make Luka happy, because I mean, what is that really? He's just a piece on the roster.
Well, at this point, getting Porzingis, I really don't know if, keeping Mejri around is going to be that big of a deal. I know he's Luka's friend, but, I mean, I don't know if that'd be that big of a deal or not, but I don't know. I just really want him to bring back Ray Spalding. And I know it's probably not going to happen, but I would rather them just buy out Zebo or send him back to Memphis, like you said. I don't know how that would work. I guess they just have to buy him out and him go back there and retire. But
yeah, I think what would happen would be that they would buy him out, and then he could go sign somewhere else. And I think he would probably go sign in Memphis and then retire.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've had a couple of I tweeted out a while ago, like, what do you do with that size of a trade exception that the Mavs are potentially going to create here? And Tyler Adams here on Twitter, he talked about next season, after the Mavs are pretty much capped out with whatever they do this summer, whether they, go out and sign Cousins or Vucevic or whoever they end up with this summer, they could take this trade exception into next season and potentially absorb, a big contract next season when they're already capped out as a salary dump type deal. So
to make a real push.
Right. So that's an option too.
It is. But let's go back to this Mejri thing for a second. Here's my question. Why don't you release Brokoff? I feel like Mejri has more potential to have an impact, especially since you just traded DeAndre and Porzingis is out and you're a little bit short on big guys. Wouldn't it make more sense to release Brokoff unless you're gonna release Mejri and then buy out Zebo and then re-sign Mejri? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, in a way it would, because I mean especially if you plan on keeping Trey Burke, because I mean you've got added shooting now. You've got Trey Burke, you've got Tim Hardaway Jr. You just added Justin Jackson, who I'm sure they're going to keep around. We were talking about this before we got on, but he's got 2 more seasons of or the Mavs could have 2 more seasons of contractual control after this season, with 2021 being a team option. Obviously, that's the summer Giannis is going to be a free agent, and he'd be making Justin Jackson would be making $5 million that season, so they could always decline that if they needed to. So we'll see how that goes, but they added him too, so that's some extra shooting.
Courtney Lee's a bomber.
Yeah, he's a really good 3-point shooter. He didn't play tonight, but
yeah, and he hasn't been shooting great this year, but I think the Knicks were just totally dysfunctional all the way around. I think the new scenery is going to help him because he shoots around 40% for his career.
So I would agree with that. Either Mejri or Brokoff one. That's the two odd men out there. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but let's talk about the game a little bit. I mean, or at least the parts that we could actually focus on. What are your thoughts on the Mavs? They're 25-28 now. They've won 5 of their last 7. I mean, they seem to have turned this thing around. They had to grit their teeth a little bit to get this one pushed through, but they're playing good basketball right now. The defense is incredible. I mean, imagine that. You're playing Maxey and Dorian Finney-Smith extended minutes. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on how the defense has performed and how they can perform in these last 30 games?
Well, I think it's going to be tough. I mean, they've won 2 games and almost won a third in Detroit with a makeshift roster.
And Luka didn't play.
And Luka didn't play in that game. So I think that it's going to be tough to make a push with all these new pieces, and there's going to be some inconsistencies and chemistry issues just on the floor. I mean, that's natural when you have such massive roster turnover. But also when you've got a guy like Luka, anything's possible. He was, like you said, he was 5 of 20 tonight shooting, but he had a triple-double. Like, how many players in the NBA can do that? Like, I mean, there's not that many. So
it's one of his biggest plus sides. Even if his shot isn't falling, he's still going to do what he needs to do. He's going to contribute in one way. He had 11 assists, 10 rebounds. He got to the free throw line 9 times, hit 7 of them. I mean, he's a basketball player, and he was a +9. He was 5 of 20 from the field, 2 of 10 from 3, and he was a +9, which was the second highest on the team. The highest was Dwight Powell.
Yeah, Powell played great. I liked a lot of the things that Tim Hardaway did also, even though, like you said earlier, his shot was a bit off. Brunson was pretty good. See, let's look at this stat. Dorian Finney-Smith, I mean, how can we forget him? He had a double-double. He was great on defense, too.
Dirk had some really thunderous dunks.
Yeah, Dirk had 8 points off the bench. So, they've got a lot right now. They've got Luka and a lot of role players, so it's going to be tough for them to win a lot of games, especially when they get back to playing the West. But for right now, yeah, it's looking pretty good. I think that they're going to be a feisty team. Anytime you got Luka, you're going to be a feisty team. And these new guys want to come in and prove they have a role on the team. So I think that's going to help them a lot too, especially Tim Hardaway Jr. He's been moved around a lot, and I think he really wants to find a home somewhere. And I think that he could probably make a convincing case to make Dallas that long-term place.
Yeah, I agree. The biggest plus, in my opinion, like I said before, is like how good of defense they're playing. Because you look at the last 4 games, like ever since they lost to the Raptors, and starting with the Knicks game, which they still had, Dennis and all them, but they gave up 90 points to the Knicks on the road. They gave up 93 points in a close loss to the Pistons on the road without Luka playing. They gave up 98 points in a 13-point win at Cleveland, which, again, Cleveland's not a good team, but 98 points given up in today's NBA is like, it's really, really good. And then tonight, you play Kemba Walker and the Hornets, who are, they're just they're fighting for spot in the playoffs in the East, and they hold them to 93 points. So, I mean, I think you've really we've seen it all year, and we've advocated for it. We wanted to see more of Kleba and Finney-Smith. And, you know, the front office has made it now to where Rick Carlisle, he has no choice. He has to play them extended minutes now. And I think it's really showing on the defensive end. And, you know, they'll play the Bucks next, which the last time they played the Bucks, they couldn't get anything to go. So we'll see how it goes this time around. They are playing them at home, but I have a good feeling about the end of this season. I think that they can find a way to make it really interesting for that last playoff spot.
Yeah, this Bucks game kind of scares me. I mean, who's going to guard? I mean, I'm going to miss Harrison Barnes in some certain respects. You know, his offense drove me crazy at some points, but he was always a really solid defender who could defend, you know, bigger wings and players. Maybe not like Giannis, because there's nobody like Giannis but Giannis, but he would have been the primary guy on him. So now that's going to have to be Dorian. So we'll see how that goes. I love Dorian as a defender, but he's still real young, you know.
Here's the thing about Harrison Barnes' defense. He's a good defender, and he had been good this year too. He's strong. He can if he goes up against other small forwards, he has a really good advantage in the strength department. But in my opinion, and I mean I'd have to look up the stats on this, but just in my opinion, and you know, using the eye test, it feels like whatever he contributes on the defensive end, he takes away a lot of that on the offensive end, because there's so many possessions that it feels like are just wasted, that were wasted because he, like you mentioned before, the tunnel vision, he would drive with nothing else on his mind except he's going to try and put the ball in the hoop. And there were a lot of more times than not, it didn't work out for him this year, and it led to some wasted possessions. So I think they'll miss him on the defensive end, but I think they'll be fine because they're playing Finney-Smith more. They're playing Maxey more. Tim Hardaway Jr., just from what I saw tonight, I mean, he doesn't look like a scrub on the defensive end. He's really athletic, really quick. I think they'll be fine, and I expect them. I mean, a lot of people with all these moves assume that, well, maybe the Mavs are starting to tank the rest of this season. I honestly think they're going to be better than they were earlier in this season. And I mean, they're 3 games out in the loss column for that 8 seed. You know, they're behind the Clippers. The Clippers just traded Tobias Harris, their best player, to Philadelphia. So you're essentially competing with the Lakers, who are an absolute mess right now, and the Sacramento Kings, who you just traded Harrison Barnes to. You're essentially fighting with those 2 teams in Minnesota for that 8 seed.
Well, you just mentioned something that I want to go back to real quick about them being better. I agree to an extent. I mean, I think that they have a ceiling on that. But as far as the players that they just got back in this Porzingis trade for this season, one, also, as you mentioned earlier, I wrote that piece about Trey Burke and how he fits. I still think he could be a really good fit with the roster. I know he only played 4 minutes in this game, but I think he is a lot of high upside to kind of fill a Berea-type role. But the one that I really want to talk about is, I want to go back to Tim Hardaway Jr. That dude has... he's a more athletic, better shooting, probably better defending at this point in their respective careers version of Wes Matthews. But he's not going to fall into that, as you wrote, he's not going to fall into that, you know, try to do too much type thing that Wes Matthews did alongside with Harrison Barnes. I mean, you wrote about that in your article a couple days ago. and he's always been very good about fitting into his role and doing exactly what a team asks him to do. And he's going to help Luka a whole lot, being the most probably the most athletically gifted shooting guard they've had since Michael Finley?
I would say so.
So, I mean, that's a huge thing to have. And then you got, the other guys that are still there, and you don't have the DeAndre standing around on defense, and you don't have the Wes Matthews firing up bricks, and you don't have Harrison's tunnel vision, and that's a lot of inefficiencies that you're getting out of your lineup.
I saw somebody tonight during the game say that Hardaway Jr. is going to be the Mavs' new version of what Monte Ellis was. And
that's interesting.
I can kind of agree with that. I mean, he's going to be a spark plug like that, but he's bigger. He's a bigger version of that if that's what he's going to be. But what I like about him is just the team aspect he brings. He doesn't, his first game as a Mav after being a starter all season with the Knicks, he came off the bench tonight, only played about 25, 26 minutes or so. And he was fine with it. I mean, he's out there diving on the floor for loose balls and just energetic from start to finish when he's out there. And that's the kind of guys that the Mavs need. Not players that are, on an expiring deal and they're it kind of feels like they're playing for their next contract more than what's in the best interest of the team. So, I mean, that's what I'm really excited for. I was excited by his debut tonight, and I think he's going to be an instant fan favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I was very impressed, with, obviously his shot numbers weren't great, but I was really impressed with the kind of things that he did, and frankly, the limited time I spent watching the game because of all this stuff that went down, I kind of lost control of what was going on in my brain. But
I'm still trying to process it. There's still a lot. I don't know. We might finish recording this and go listen back and say, what the heck are we talking about? But I don't know. I'm still processing all of this.
No, I mean, we might get back on here. We might get back on here on Thursday. But going back to Hardaway, the more I think about it, I really do like that Monte Ellis comparison. I mean it,
and not just because of the number. He is wearing number 11 like Monte did, but
no. Yeah, not just because of the number, but because of the he can create his own shot. He can hit from deep. He can drive to the lane. He can play a little defense too when he wants to, and he plays really, really hard. And to be honest, he kind of strikes me as the same kind of professional on and off the court, that maybe not to the extent that Harrison Barnes is, because that's a really tough person to measure up to in that regard. But as far as, character and team guy, he seems like a really, really good teammate. And I think he and Trey Burke, both being Michigan guys, are going to be, I think they played together at Michigan, and then they played together in New York, and now they're here together. I think that relationship's going to help both of them as well.
Well, and you talk about him being a team guy, and Harrison Barnes, I think he really is, as far as being a good locker room presence, he's a really good team guy too. But on the court, his style of play, I don't know. Like, for example, just to show you the difference between him and what Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to bring, Harrison Barnes is averaging 18 points this year and 4 rebounds and 1 assist per game. And, he's been shooting the ball really well from 3, 39%. Well, you look at Tim Hardaway Jr., he's averaging 19 points per game this season and 3 assists per game. Almost 4 rebounds too. So he's averaging more points, about the same rebounds, and he's averaging almost 3 times as many assists per game as what Barnes is. So he can share the ball too. And averaging nearly 3 assists on that New York team, while also jacking up 7 threes a game, and I mean, that's pretty impressive. So I think he's gonna the more comfortable he gets, he's really, like I wrote the other day, you can go to DallasBasketball.com and read it, but I really think Hardaway Jr. is going to be the big underrated piece of this Porzingis trade. And Porzingis is going to be amazing. Him and Luka are going to be amazing. But I think this is going to be one of those underrated pieces here. He's going to be a glue guy.
Yeah, no, he's going to be that fourth or fifth guy on a roster that puts you over the top, that LeBron James never had in Cleveland, that he could have, really used there towards the end.
Yeah, and he's only 26 years old too, and I mean he's basically on the same contract that Wes was on, and Wes, I believe he's 32 going on 33, but it doesn't hurt near as bad with Hardaway Jr. going forward.
No, it doesn't. And also, to come to Wes's defense a little bit, aside from the age thing, he was never the same player after that Achilles. And the Mavericks did, they took a risk in, signing him after that, and it didn't work out. With Hardaway, they don't have to worry about that. He's got a clean bill of health. He's a better athlete. He's a better shooter. So, maybe he's what they kind of envisioned when they signed Wes, or what they wanted when they took that risk, what they gambled on. And
right.
This is going to be a younger version of that.
Right, yeah. And I mean, Fish mentioned this the other day too. Let's not, I'm not going to get too carried away with it. Obviously, the Mavs took on Hardaway Jr. and Lee. They took on those contracts so they could give the Knicks some cap space. That it was unwanted salary to them, but I think that Lee, more so than Tim Hardaway Jr., was more of a pill to swallow than. Like I said, Lee's more of a pill to swallow for the Mavs than Tim Hardaway Jr., given what I think he's gonna produce for them. But it's like today or tonight when they traded Barnes though. The Knicks gave up Porzingis, their franchise player. They gave up Tim Hardaway Jr., who was averaging almost 20 points a game for them. And still has, 2 years after this year on his contract. Just so they could have Dennis Smith Jr. and a bunch of cap space. And then, so they send all this money to the Mavs. And then a few days later, the Mavs make a deal with the Kings for Harrison Barnes. And looky there, the Mavs have over $30 million in cap space again. So, I mean, we mentioned Donnie just being on fire earlier. I don't know what else you can say about it. He's doing everything possible to make this team a contender as soon as possible.
I don't know what to say about Donnie, man.
He's got to be GM of the year. He's got to win that award, you would think, at this point.
Who else wins it?
I don't know.
Depending on what happens in Philadelphia, Elton Brand might have an argument because he got Jimmy Butler and he got Tobias Harris and he got the superhuman Boban. If they can make a push, maybe that's the only guy you can really say can contend with Donnie at this point, because Donnie has literally changed the entire trajectory of this franchise in 8 months.
He really has, and like we said, he's still not done either. Even if they don't do something before the trade deadline tomorrow, you still have the buyout market after that. And Mark Cuban made some comments. I think it was at the Porzingis Hardaway Jr. press conference, or the new player press conference the other day. I don't know if it was during the conference or afterwards or what, but he made the comments that the buyout market would be something they were going to look into, especially since they're not going to be tanking. So I don't know what you envision there, but one name I'm keeping an eye on is Wayne Ellington.
That could be interesting.
Because there were some rumors about the Mavs being interested in him, a month or so ago, and then today he was traded to Phoenix. Miami sent Tyler Johnson and Wayne Ellington to Phoenix for Ryan Anderson, which I don't understand that. It seems like a lateral move for both of them. But anyway, it's being
weird.
Yeah, it's being speculated that Wayne Ellington's going to be bought out. So if they had interest in him earlier, that might be something to keep an eye on. Are there any other buyout candidates you can think of off the top of your head that the Mavs might be interested in?
I mean, honestly, I have no idea. I don't know who's really gonna. I mean, I would want them to do something like bring Wes or DeAndre back.
If they're interested, we talked about Anthony Tolliver earlier. There was a rumor about the Mavs being interested in him, and I think the same rumor came up last year. I think they were interested in adding him last year too, when he was on the Pistons. But
I actually just came across a name that is more interesting than Anthony Tolliver. I want to run by you real quick.
Who you got?
So we all know the Knicks are on a fire sale. They can't find, right now at least, they haven't been able to find a trade partner for Enes Kanter. That could be interesting.
Yeah, that could be. You know what that would remind me of? It would if he got bought out and Kanter came to Dallas. Would that not be similar to when they got Amari Stoudemire? Just as far as like the style, all offense, not much defense. Could be a spark plug off of the bench. I mean, I feel like there's a connection you can make there.
Yeah, no, I that's exactly what I'm going for here. I mean, they need some scoring off of that bench. They really, really do. I mean, I know they added these guys from New York, but you got to think Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to be in the starting lineup going forward. You got to think that Dorian's probably going to have to be in the starting lineup going forward, especially with Barnes gone. So, what does that really leave you on your bench? You got to add some scoring. So, Enes Kanter is a name that could be really interesting, especially if they're starting Maxey. Another one that I just came across, which, I mean, I'd never really been a big fan of the guy, but
hit me.
As soon as you put on a Mavs uniform, you're my best friend. Ryan Anderson. Just get a guy that can shoot some threes on a cheap deal. See what happens. I mean,
and again, we're talking buyout market, so we're assuming we're saying the Mavs team as currently constructed goes past the deadline tomorrow, and then they're looking to make additions that can help them push for a playoff spot. So ideally, you just mentioned Anderson. I like the idea earlier, of trying to do what they can to see if they can get Mirotić from New Orleans. That would be ideal. But if not, and say Ryan Anderson does get bought out by Miami, I mean that fits kind of the same mold. So I could see something like that. I don't know if they'd do that, but it makes sense given what their biggest need is right now on that bench. Really, as a team, they need some more three-point shooting.
Yeah, they just need somebody that can come off the bench and hit some shots, man. And whether that's Ryan Anderson or I don't know if maybe Rudy Gay gets bought out. I don't think that's going to happen. J.R. Smith might get bought out, but keep that guy away from my team.
I mentioned the defense earlier, how good it's been over this last stretch of games where they've been winning and everything, but the offense has been, lacking, to put it nicely. It's like tonight against the Hornets, they shot 40% from the field. They shot 30% from three, which isn't terrible. They hit a couple of threes. They hit some more threes as the game went on. They started out horrible, but they were 11 of 36 overall. But, I mean, they just haven't been as crisp offensively as you would like. And a lot of that has to do with Luka. You know, like I said, he went 5 of 20 tonight, so that contributes a lot to it. But if they can still win and only give up, you know, points in the 90s, I'll take it. I'll take an ugly win over a loss any day. But you would like to see them add some offense. And I mean, they don't have to do it before the trade deadline. They don't have to do it in the buyout market. You know, they could just play it out with who they've got and, you know, go after somebody else in free agency. Or multiple people in free agency, maybe some second tier guys. So I mean, they don't have to do it all right now, but they still have some gaps to fill going forward. Well, we'll end with that. We've had a lot to talk about tonight. That tends to happen around this time of year with the NBA trade deadline. We've been #blessed this season because we got the Porzingis blockbuster a full week before the deadline. And then we got some excitement tonight with Harrison Barnes being moved to the Kings and the Mavs creating that cap space. So we'll look forward to talking with you guys next week. Heck, we might even be back on here, you know, tomorrow night if something else big happens. But we just want to thank you guys for listening as always, and we plan to bring you the best content we can going forward.
Yeah, and keep your eyes tuned to DallasBasketball.com. We're going to be all over this trade deadline stuff as it keeps going, so just keep your eyes peeled there and tell your friends to like and subscribe and rate us on iTunes and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and again, if you like the new intro, which I'm sure you do, I don't know how you couldn't, you can look up Andrew Bishop, a.k.a. Drew Pock. You can look him up on Twitter. It's at Drew32 all day. He's got his AudioMac link in his bio there. You can check out his other music. Really talented dude. Just give him a listen. Give him some support because, like I said, he's part of this the Step Back podcast team. And, I mean, we can't thank him enough for blessing us with this new intro. So we really appreciate him. And, again, we appreciate you guys. We'll see you guys next time.
That's the Mavericks, all about action. Don't do no action, no Samuel Jackson. Dunk at the ball, you know that it's magic. Post move deadly, yeah, get tragic.
You know, in this game, it's a lot of grit. You know what I'm saying? Proves who has integrity. Late nights, early mornings, but we all want the trophy at the end of the day. And that's the beauty of this game, because at the end of the day, only the real gonna float, man, for real. You either sink or you float. Only the real gonna float.